Hi, friends. Thanks for tuning in once again to Adali TV. Welcome to episode 2 of our Path to Independence podcast. But before we begin, I just want to say a big, heartfelt, tremendous thank you to everyone who supported this little channel right here. Thank you for everyone who liked, subscribed, recommended, followed, shared, commented, all of the things. So thank you. I appreciate you. We appreciate you. Thank you for the support. Uh, Speaking of support, we have a sponsor. How about that? So this episode of the podcast is sponsored by the Tequila Sunrise B&B. Choose Tequila Sunrise for all your short-term and vacation rental needs. Tequila Sunrise, quality accommodations at an affordable price. And now, here's episode 2. Enjoy.
But let's not also separate that whole question of indentureship from slavery. Because all that happened is that they just brought the Asians, the Indians here, and just put them in the same physical conditions that African people had walked away from. Straight to the plantation that African people had walked away from. So this is discontinuity, that I think we need to understand historically. And Craig, don't throw anything.
I'm not going to. But, this, I wish I could talk to you for the whole day. But you talk about the genesis of this sort of the stirring of the people to say enough is enough since the 20s, the 1920s. You talk about the oil workers in Trinidad, sugar workers in British Guyana, estate workers in Jamaica, union members in Barbados, cane cutters in St. Kitts, and waterfront workers in Antigua. It's almost as if we're connected by some invisible thread of DNA that makes us all almost simultaneously react and rise up and say enough is enough. What is it within our DNA that's making us do that?
I think it's just human, isn't it? It is just a human reaction to existence under conditions created by other people around you.
Right.
And what is common in all of this are the colonial conditions that all these people are living in.
Yeah.
The colonial conditions, the governor, the rioting policemen, the abuse of law, the absence of health care, the absence of education. These are people who had, as I said, had seen the world and who knew what the world was about and who knew their own history that they had come from. And it is a revolt against colonialism that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so what does the British do? It's important that we also track them as the keepers of colonialism, if we want. What do? They send a commission out to this region, a mine commission. This commission comes and travels up and down this Caribbean and takes notes of the horrible conditions. And you know what their response is? Their response is social welfare. Their response has absolutely nothing to do about development, nothing to do about bettering the agricultural output, etc., of our countries. Nothing to do about an industrial development for these countries where people are yearning for it. Their response is social welfare. So they set up, the fines institutes, etc., and to give poor people $2 and $3 a week. And that was their response from the Mine Commission to the revolt of Caribbean people against colonialism. And so that revolt doesn't stop. It goes through a different phase. It goes through different phases because at the same point in time now, things like what you call it, the ability to vote. By the 1950s now, Caribbean people now begin for the first time to have a decent say in selecting their leaders and being able to vote without owning property, etc. And so the struggle goes through a different phase. And I think that, we track that history and we see the different phases and the different changes taking place, but it's always been about control of oneself, one's country, of one's people. That has always been and continues to be what the struggle is about.
Love it. Jabba,
I
go
I
ahead.
I I'm struck by some of your words, and I'm listening to my heart, and I'm thinking, as we go through the whole dichotomy of the power of development versus colonial structure. There is an international recognition of wrongdoing when others collectively are dealt with unfairly, or as international standards would say, are dealt with in a massacred manner. But there's an absence of the recognition of Europeans that, what has gone through in terms of slavery needs to be fixed. And so the economic support for development is not there because the intention is not for the region to develop. It's dependency. And so as we fight towards independence, how do we as a nation fight that lack of resources? Our parents and my grandparents always alluded to how much they had. And I would laugh when my dad would tell me what his salary was in 1970 something as an agricultural. I said, what? He said, yeah, and that's for a whole month. And that's what you spend on lunch. But when you see the infrastructure that was developed through that era, without the wholehearted support of the progenitors of why we're here, how did we succumb that? How did we get past that?
We haven't gotten past it. It manifests itself in debt. It manifests itself in the tremendous debt burden that all our countries in this Caribbean carry. One point in time, I think the statistics might have changed recently, but I know for sure a decade ago, there were at least 3 or 4 Caribbean countries, based on GDP figures, that would have been among the 10 most indebted countries in the world.
Wow.
And so we haven't gotten through it. It is an existence in continuous debt. And that has very clear ramifications on our abilities to talk independently, because we are in debt. IMF and World Bank and this, whatever the other institutions, all these institutions around the place. Now that might be changing a bit more, a bit moving slightly, perhaps let's say towards a country like China, where the conditions are not perhaps as onerous as the debt burden that we carried from elsewhere. But I want to go back because I think that is where I should have really ended the comment. The comment basically that it is about debt. But the reality is that absolutely, when we think of it, post-World War II, that countries like ours, the colonies and the former colonies, because of the economics and the economic structures established within them, that there were structures basically aimed at extraction of wealth, that there is absolutely no wealth left in this Caribbean. We may have some people with some money, but there is no wealth. You will notice there are no organizations here, there are no foundations anywhere in this region that you want support for your program that you can turn to, that I can turn to. It just doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah, we may have one or two large companies, etc., that may, a little bit of philanthropy here, but in a general sense.
Yes.
And so what we are talking about, and again, I'm going back to, understanding what colonialism did to us, what colonial and enslavement did to us in terms of the economic structures that we inherited.
Yeah.
Antigua, what we inherited, a monoculture, sugar. When I grew up, every piece of land in this country was covered with sugar. Not only it was covered with sugar, but the technology for refining that sugar, the mechanics for refining that sugar, the British records will show that they said that not even a nail is to be manufactured in these countries. So there is no technology either. Not even a nail must be manufactured here. So when we now come in our society and say, oh, young people not relating to technology, but it is not that simple. We have a history of no relationships to technology. And I'm fascinated by some of the things that are going on in these countries right now as to about that ability of our young people to jump over those type of barriers. We haven't reached there yet. And so what I think must be clear to us is that we inherited these structures with no financial and economic ability to break out of them.
Wow.
When Britain got bombed, they sent in the Marshall Plan, did they not? 60 billion worth of US dollars went in to rebuild Europe.
Right.
Because there was need. We had the same needs. When I mentioned this, the Colombo Plan, when South Asia, Ceylon, Sarawak, all of them moved to independence, Britain moved in with 1.5 billion pounds and said, here you are, build your bridges, build your universities, build your factories, build, etc., build your bridges. Because they recognize, and we all recognize that need. And that is the assistance the Caribbean has never received. And until we receive that type, don't worry with people talking about begging. We will never work our way out of the entrapment that we're in today without that type of assistance.
Wow.
Because we just can't, the thinking and the ideology and the influence internationally. If you want a good example of how debt deals with us, take a look at the history of Michael Manley. When Michael Manley got into power, he became a spokesperson for this third world against the imperial capitalist struggle. They moved in, armed Jamaica, ran him out of power. He eventually got back into power. By the time he got back into power, Jamaica's debt was so severe, he could not say boo in the world about his position. He became a different politician altogether. That is the criminality of the debt that we are faced with right now. So for me, that the movement out of this requires major financial economic assistance.
Craig, I don't know if you'd allow me. There, and that brings me to a begging question, and I'm looking at the situation now, even in the United States, and I'm pondering the recognition of the African rights and the slavery and what has been done seems to be always secondary or not even in the mindset of those persons who readily, as you mentioned, rebuilt Europe after World War II. And it was internationally recognized that a certain sect of people was sought after and treated barbarically. And what was the first thought that they could fix this? Money.
Mm-hmm.
And so where's our recognition of this partition that was placed between us and the continent of Africa? And here are we in the middle of the ocean trying to make life. And where's the recognition of how did these people get here? And what did these people go through?
It's going. I think it's the strongest it has ever been right at this point in time. And there's serious recognition, not only on this side of the pond, but also on the African side of the pond, as to exactly what these connections are and what potential they have to make this world a better place. Because the idea now is that we only not necessarily only now talking about making Antigua salaries higher. We're really talking about making this world a better place for Black people to live in generally. And so it's important that the continent be involved in this. It's important that our connections, our Caribbean connections with the African communities in the United States of America and in Europe become extremely stronger, and that we are all fighting the same battle. I mean, this is what my global reparations struggle is about. It is about a global struggle at this point in time to challenge Europe, essentially, that you are owing us for 200 years of labor. And if you pay us that, we are cool. If you pay us that, I mean, not only just the money, essentially, you know, I mean, because we're talking a bunch of other things as far as within the whole reparation struggle is concerned. But it is, I think, the first step out of the bind, out of the historical bind that we find ourselves in. And so we're talking a global movement. We're talking right now just, I mean, an intensification of connections between this Caribbean and Africa. Possibilities of trade, possibilities of investment, possibilities of air and sea connections, the exchanges that's going on as far as education, health, culture, etc., that are taking place right now, way beyond, let's say, what we were dealing with 15, 20 years ago, when it was only a sort of cultural connection, a sort of cultural, emotional connection. It's become a very real connection at this point in time. And so that to me is quite important. And I think when I say it's important, I do not think, I know we're not supposed to be talking reparations,
but I promise you, in the next 10 minutes, we'll get to that part. I guarantee you.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, you know, is that all these struggles will find their solutions there. And so if I'm attempting to analyze these things at this point in time, that is where I go.
Right.
Because but look at it, we have toyed around with all sorts of other avenues for the last 50, 60 years as far as development is concerned, and these are the conditions that we still exist here. And I think that what we are searching for and leading to is perhaps the real solution at this point in time.
Yeah. So I want to, again, I wish we had all day to talk through all these things. I want to lighten the mood just a little bit, because some of this can get a little heavy. But in reading through again in the book, you also interject a little bit of humor, somewhat unintentionally. And there's some wow factor to it. And I like to be wowed. I don't read much, And if I read something, it has to wow me. Not every page has to wow me, but I need something every couple pages to make me keep turning the pages. Um, you talk about the almost you allude to the Yankee invasion, where they start building these bases strategically in the Caribbean, Antigua, Trinidad, so on and so forth. Um, and ostensibly, um, this sounds like a great idea, right? We are post-war, we mid-war, post-war. Um, uh, the base will bring jobs. The base will bring off-plantation work, right? We're not cutting no more cane. So now we have actual work, engineering, construction, so on and so forth. Um, but you talk about how the importing of these foreigners, the Yankee people, to the islands brought some unsatiable conduct, some less desirable things. They bring a certain sense of entitlement to the country. They come and they're getting their salary, they're getting basically free labor, free housing, training, so on and so forth. They have a lot of free time on their hands. And again, I'm struck by how the experience is similar across the other islands, because you talked about in Trinidad where, uh, and this is where it gets a little humorous, where when the Yankees came, the local women sort of gravitated to the dollar, right, so to speak. And so local men, quote unquote, local men, became less desirable. And there's the point where that goes away and the Yankee dollar goes away. And so now these women who were once looking this way now have to come back and look this way back to the men. And the part that struck me was in the Trinidad case, I've always heard this song growing up, the Gina Dinah song, right? Oh, I started cracking up. The Yankees gone. Sparrow, how does it go? The Yankee gone?
Take over. Sparrow take over.
No. I never knew what that meant. I never knew what that meant. These women who were attracted to the Yankee dollar, going crazy, having a good time. Now the Yankee dollar is gone. Now you can get them 2-for-1. Talk about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we must understand the influence that this invasion of young men with money in their pocket had on societies, essentially, as I perhaps described, as squanting societies at this point in time. And so they moved into, and the United States government obviously, knew exactly what it was doing in many ways. The soldiers who went to Trinidad were primarily white or primarily black soldiers. Those who came here were primarily white soldiers. And so they brought with them, and here, the Virgin Islands, for example, there's a base, I think, in St. Lucia. They brought with them their racism. They brought with them their sense of superiority, and they had money to back it up. They had transportation to back it up.
Yeah.
They moved into Trinidad and they took over the clubs in Port of Spain. Not only did they take over the clubs physically by their presence and by their spending power, they also helped to determine what entertainment Trinidadians would produce. And so the calypso then took on this idea of smut and bawdiness, because it was at that level that they could understand the lyrics of the calypso, and it was at that level that they saw and understood what black people in this region were about or should be about as far as they were concerned. I mean, these sort of influences have, in some way still run through our societies.
Yes.
Still run through, the white man with his money, and gets the prettiest girl around the place. I mean, it still runs through there. And part of our struggle is to combat those sorts of influences, because we know the genesis of them. We know in the position to analyze the genesis of these things. We can talk about them skillfully and recognize them when we see them. So it's a continuation of the work. The education systems, of course, we have to deal with that, with all those systems that continue, regardless of all the chat we've had over the last 2-3 decades, that have not made the necessary changes, I think, to combat the sort of mental aberrations that many of our people live in and live with.
Beautiful. Okay,
Yeah,
quickly.
I think.
Go ahead, John.
Sorry. And I just to piggyback the idea of the neo-colonialism through culture and the influence of the naval bases. It also was part of a show that Antigua and the Caribbean had some strategic importance, militarily, to the United States. For securing this area. We are essentially the bridge to the rest of the world. We're the peaceful part of the middle of the ocean where everybody comes to party. And so we have to, in order for them to take us seriously, we have to transcend that. And I know we cuss for time, but I wanted to just touch a little bit about the connection between, as a matter of fact, Craig, take it. I'll digress my question because it's gonna lead me where master control.
Maybe we'll come back to it then.
Wants to touch it, but it's just to say that whole influence of the American culture, is where my interest lies. But the other half of it, the Black Americans who are affluent. How do we get together and start investing as a block? Those athletes, I'm going to single them out, who are of Black and Hispanic and all of us in the region. It's time for us to have that conversation. But Craig, I'll digress a little bit, because I think that conversation is sort of convoluted by this same image of who the Caribbean is. The party, the swinging, and I don't want to say the trees and the coconut idea. How do we surpass that and let them know that we are a block that can foster serious investment and give the people in the United States who have cash but not respect the idea that, you know what, here is a part of Africa that exists outside of Africa. And we can strengthen that continuum by fostering the relationship between us and them. How many Black-owned 5-star hotels are there? Anyway, Craig and I go no further.
Go ahead, Mr. Omar. I will allow it.
No, but I mean, my answer is very simple. I don't know how we bridge that. Honestly, don't. I have a lot of problems dealing with, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this, but I do have a lot of problems dealing with a Black African American mentality. I understand. Wow. I understand the devastation and the different impact that enslavement has had on the Black African American population. And so we are part of, and partner with a number of Black American organizations to try and find our way, find those ways to address the question I think that Jomo is asking. It hasn't been straightforward for us. It just has not been straightforward, especially when we begin to talk things like money, economics, and finance, etc. As to make those connections between their economic, their financial viability, and the possibility of development, even outside the shores of the United States. Development within on the African continent itself, with people working for $1 million a month. One would think that they should be able to do a lot more, not even outside of America, but inside America
Of America.
also.
Yeah.
Inside
Yeah.
America.
And that is where the conversation lies, that even with the cash, they don't have the respect and the lack of recognition of these people who built America with their blood and sweat, just as we did through colonial slavery. And there is an intrinsic value, and they say, okay, you've got your mule and 10 acres or whatever. And so that money in your pocket now, it doesn't translate into a psyche of leadership. Somehow there's a disconnect.
And so I agree completely. I mean, there are quite a few. I guess we must admit there are quite a few who stand out, who are outside of that broad brush that we're painting. But they're not many, and they certainly don't impact us here in the Caribbean. And I'm not too sure what impact they have on the continent itself either.
Excellent. We're going to get to the next level of independence and forward in about 5 minutes, but I want to keep moving along the Antiguan experience, right? So we covered the colonial part. We covered the Yankee, quote unquote, Yankee invasion. And then I want to get to the unrest, right? Right before statehood and all the things that led up to that. In the, I guess, the late 60s, mid 60s, there's a tumultuous period in Antigua defined by a lot of industrial activism. There's people forming unions, there's striking, there's picketing, there's protesting of the establishment. But in that tumult, I see a bifurcation. There is the workers against the establishment. And then shortly thereafter, there was the worker versus the worker. Somehow we managed to win the argument or win the case for statehood. But even in the genesis and the beginning of that, we start to war amongst ourselves. I'm talking about the trade union, ATLU, and how they sort of came into power and they started making changes that were not exactly popular among the local people. They wanted to cut wages. They wanted to make a few changes. And then the workers going, no. This is not what we fought for. Why are you doing this to us? We were here supporting you against the establishment. And now here you are just basically being an extension of it. And now there's this bifurcation of ALP, PLM. Can you talk us through life? Because at that point, you're probably a teenager, right? At this point in history.
I mean, the bifurcation is not between the Antigua Labour Party and the PLM. The bifurcation takes place within the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party.
Right.
The bifurcation that takes place between the trade union aspect of the ATLU and the Antigua Labour Party. Because the Antigua Labour Party comes out of the ATLU.
Right.
The Labour Party is the political wing of the union, which is working class.
Right.
Protection, working class development. But unfortunately, it's the same set of leaders who now emerge in the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party, which is the political wing, which now has allegiance to the colonial government and the colonial government structures that allows it to flourish.
Right.
It reached a point where the officers of the union were also ministers of government. And
No conflict
although
of interest
this,
there, right?
you know, the point where the head of the union, VC Bird, is also head of the government.
Right.
And maintains being head of the union, not attending union meetings for years. That is where the bifurcation takes place. The struggle of those in service to the colonial government structure, and those who are profiting from their allegiance to that colonial political government structure, being in the same position as those who are struggling for the betterment of working class.
But was that the bargain? We would grant you statehood.
Sorry, go again.
Was that the bargain? We would grant you statehood if you remain what's the word? Loyal subjects to our agenda. Do you think that was
the bargain?
Part of the bargain in getting statehood?
Well, it would not have been expressed that way, but it's certainly expressed in the entrenched clauses of the Constitution. That says if you accept this Constitution, there are a number of things that you cannot change. You cannot join the Caribbean Court of Justice. You must remain loyal to the Privy Council. You must remain loyal to the concept of a governor general. You cannot think of becoming a republic unless you manage 2/3 majority in the population, which in a population that's split 50-50, politically, achieving 2/3 majority here on any matter at all is impossible.
Impossible.
At this point. And so we are locked in as part of the bargain, if you want to put it that way, and maybe not in the sense, I think, or in the direct way that you've expressed it, Craig, to suggest that we will do this.
Subtly.
Yeah. No, the British too subtle for that. No, what they simply say is that these are the conditions under which we will grant you that status, and especially after they have destroyed the Federation.
Yeah.
And so this search for political manhood among us as a Caribbean people is extremely strong, to the extent that we accepted a number of conditions in those constitutions that they handed to us, that I think we are seriously regretting right now. Certainly regretting here in Antigua.
Jamo, we're beholden to the old ways.
Well, you see, but we continue it. We can broaden that argument. It is the education structure that we accepted too.
Yeah.
The grammar school, the high school structure, the GCE from Cambridge. We broadened that into the religious structure that we accepted and maintained. White man go, white man at the castle, the poor man at the gates, and we can go through all of those ramifications. But we are a people that have been on the siege. Yeah. What we're doing now is trying to fight our way out of that siege. We're fighting through the education system, dealing with the concepts of religion. The Rastafari don't exist and blossom as it has blossomed arbitrarily. There's a recognition among our people for a different sense of spirituality. And so it's all these conditions that came with statehood. Statehood. But no, it wasn't bare stated. It wasn't bareback statehood. It had a whole and still has a whole bunch of strings attached to it. As we moved into the independence, there's absolutely no difference moving into independence. It's actually the same thing. It's a continuation of the same thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think and existentially, you look at the education, and that is where my pet peeve has always been. The curriculum is to keep you into that circle. And so, what we learn as children what we learn as young people, what we learn, what we regurgitate as education. How do we steer that education, especially our history, to reflect our greatness as Black people? And how do we entrench that into our children so that they don't walk around with this? Because see, that whole idea of the political division between labor and whoever, and the idea that one has to be beholding in order to hold this is a game that these colonial guys have been playing with human beings. And it makes me emotional because this is where we have to free ourselves. Your mind is the only place they can't touch. And that is where we have to think critically about who we really are, even how our political system mimics the fight between brother and brother. That's a mimic of what they fed us as how do we evolve and say, listen, we don't have to do that. Because you know what? At the end of the day, what we need to foster is some kind of growth regionally and recognize that each one of these archipelagos have a little piece in a pie, that pie is really in our unification and not our dissemination as party and color and so forth. Those things are really part of the colonial aspect of mind control. And you know, I want you to touch that. How did the education of your generation and generations past help to kind of set the mindset that we don't have to do this?
A lot of it didn't take place formally. As far as Dan is the man in the band. If I was bright, I'd perhaps be a damn fool.
Fool, yes, the drums of slavery, the messages.
But I think, you know, the reality is you ask the question that you ask, the answer is about continued struggle. There are no sort of one shop, one stop, one shop responses to how we get ourselves out of this. It's a complicated situation we're in, and therefore the answers and the approaches to getting out of that complicated situation that we're in, that is also complicated. And that struggle has to take place on all various levels. And we need soldiers in every sector of this society that is prepared to take on that mantle. We need them in education. We need them in health. We need them in social services. We need them in technology services. We need them in financial services. I don't think we have been producing them, or maybe we have been, but the migration, because of the economic situations that we're in, the debt that we're in, that perhaps many of them up in North America with you guys.
Guilty as charged.
You know, but we recognize in this country, we recognize very clearly what the struggle is about. But recognition is certainly not the answer only. We recognize what is happening in education across this region. It's 25 years ago we set up our own Caribbean Examination
Council. That's right.
And up to now, the changes that have been demanded in the curriculum are not happening. It is within this period, the last 25 years, that we stopped teaching history in our schools. I mean, we are struggling now to have the teaching of history reintroduced into our schools. And so we have people leaving school with all sorts of 20 CXC subjects and all sorts of things without understanding who they are. Wow. No concept, but we know this. But you know, if we just take a look at that one situation, It's so tied up with the publishers of books who now have contracts that their books will be part of the education system for the next 5 years. And so you can't change the curriculum unless you're going to change the books, but you can't change the books because of the contracts, and because you can't do that, you maintain the curriculum to see out the contracts of the books publishers. It's a whole mix-up, essentially.
Wow.
It's about who is what the university councils are doing in terms of funding departments of history, even in the University of the West Indies, led by right now one of the foremost historians in this region, and the challenges they have to deal with the council, etc., etc. To expand the departments of history in the University of the West Indies. It's none of these things are very simple and straightforward. Very complicated issues.
Wow.
I think the analysis has been done. We know the analysis has been done.
But now,
finding the political and economic solutions remain problematic.
But now,
Me too.
in everything you just described, what's jumping out to me is a very, I guess, pointed question. This is supposed to be our independent special, but now begs the question: are we really independent?
Who is?
if we cannot
it's a serious
question. Yeah, if we can't even set our own curriculum and get certain classes.
Listen, man. I am listening to United States politics. 50% of your population votes for Trump. Who is independent?
Oh boy! Oh boy!
The United Kingdom has had 6 or 7 prime ministers in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
in a week.
Who is? You know, I mean, this whole question of independence to me doesn't revolve around, the idea of self-contained.
No.
For me, it revolves around self-thinking. It revolves around what your visions and your aspirations are. If we think of independence in the concept of having everything and, this, if we do that, then that's not possible. No. I watch gas prices in the United States move up to what? Tell it is $10 a gallon or whatever it is. Who is independent?
Nobody. Nobody. No, we're moving to global.
And so we need to. I think what we now need to be talking about are what aspects of our lives we should be in control of. Yeah. It's not a question of whether we're independent or not. It's a question of how much of the thinking are we controlling what is in our capacities and our capabilities of controlling. And there are certain things that we can't control.
That's deep.
We can't control gas prices, jump high or low, full stop. We're part of an international market in many other aspects of it. We can't control climate change. We just have to either argue hard for understanding the question of loss and damage. We have to argue hard for it because we can't control it. The control and the possibilities of limiting climate change are not with us, they're with the developed countries. And so since we can't control climate change, can we therefore talk about being independent? No, that is not my approach to the understanding of the independence issue.